Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Does China have more gold than the U.S.? Let's explore! This is an article that was sent to me by a member of the community, and it is quite an interesting thought process here. We're going to take a look at this article and see if there's any validity or truth to it. And as with anything coming out of China, one never knows. Beijing, China's gold reserves have grown every year for 15 consecutive years, reaching 14,727.6 tons by 2020, according to a yearbook issued by the China Gold Association. Well, that should send up some red flags, pun intended. Nonetheless, let's take a look a little bit about what kind of gold production there has been around the world. And we're going to look at this article here that comes from Visual Capitalist Elements, brought to us by mining.com, gold production by country in 2020. And we can see here that China tops them all. And this is sourced by USGS. And we know that gold and silver have been produced. The slowdown of the metals production has been decreased. The price of gold broke an all-time high of over $2,000 an ounce last year, giving miners a brief boost to profitability. But these mine shutdowns due to the pandemic dented global gold production relative to the year prior in 2019. We can see the top 10 gold producing companies, and there they are there, and China tops them all. And due to the resumption of gold mining activities after the pandemic-induced lockdowns, China accounted for 30% of global demand for gold jewelry in 2020, offering miners an additional incentive for production. And let's take a look at this little infographic here. We can see all around the world and see how much China accounts for there. And the U.S. is far behind in terms of production. But you look at the grouping of all the other countries around the world, 750 tons account for all these other gray areas on the screen here for the world. But Australia accounts for quite a bit too. They are a second in the amount of production there. Europe, all around, which includes Russia, accounts for 300 tons. But nonetheless, everybody's been saying that when China does produce gold, it imports gold, and it is buying gold, adding gold. Very little of it's going out. A lot of it is coming in. But you can see the source here, the United States Geological Survey. So with China being the largest producer of gold last year, there may be some credence to the theory that perhaps China is beating us in terms of gold. 14,727.16 tons by 2020. That's pretty interesting, mind-blowing. Despite factors including the COVID-19 pandemic and policies related to mining rights, the country's gold output still ranked the top in the world, standing at 365.35 tons in 2020, as we saw in the infographic there. This represents a decline of 14.88 tons at 3.91%, lower from the same period in 2019, according to the CGA report. I wouldn't mind having 14.88 tons of gold. Noting an evident decelerating pace in the contraction of gold production in 2020 compared with the previous years, China's gold production industry's transformation from high-speed growth to high-quality development is showing sound momentum. The total traded volume of gold in the Chinese market reached 95,500 tons in 2020, accounting for 13.72% of gold transactions in the global market. The yearbook published by the CGA, again that's the China Gold Association, provided an analytical report on the development and future trend of China's gold industry, covering the entire industry chain, including gold exploration, mining, processing, and investment. And here we can see, I don't know if this thing will open up a bigger, yeah, this is gold reserves changes over the past 20 years. This is pretty informative here. And we can see that we've actually lost a little bit with 8,135 tons of gold. And we can see that we've lost over the past since 2000. And Germany has lost a little bit. Italy, no change. Whereas these other countries are, of course, this is cut off here, but they're adding. More likely, I don't know. But it's interesting. Japan's adding. India's adding by a factor, great factor for their gold reserves or changes in gold reserves. Fascinating indeed to see how much they're adding here. Turkey as well. We've covered Turkey. We've covered India and what they've been adding too. Look at that. Pretty amazing. So, whether imported, mined, or recycled, most of the gold that enters China goes through the Shanghai Gold Exchange, including the gold imported from Hong Kong. So SGE withdrawals, for which we do have numbers, can act as something of an approximation for demand. And it is possible to get numbers for SGE, the Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals, since 2008. Roughly 20,000 tons have been withdrawn from the SGE. It is understated by at least 30%. There was a quick analysis they did years ago. More has been written about it since then. It's an excerpt from back then in the market structure as a tell on how much they own, control versus ownership. What does give us a clue about the actual amount of gold held by China is the market structure of the Chinese bullion market. It gives us a much better idea how much gold they own or control. Controlled assets are a step away from being owned. And that's the difference in how you can play with the numbers, I believe, which means that, how this is done. Here's the buyer, get trading, deposit money in this thing, and talks about withdrawing, delivering from the vault, and the like. And so it shows the structure there, and it can confiscate all the gold held by the Shanghai Gold Exchange and Hong Kong markets. So that's saying that, well, yeah, of course it's covering everything there, and we don't know exactly. China's a different society. It is a communist country, for all intents and purposes, using capitalism to the state's advantage, and controlling companies and the like. So yeah, I guess they could technically do that. So they may be counting all the gold that is being withdrawn by people. These are people here, buyers and sellers. That is the market, the exchange market. So my guess is if you count, especially understanding Chinese society and the culture there, and gold being a pretty big part of the culture, as it is in India, there's a lot more private ownership of gold and a much denser and larger population than in the United States. So when you take that into account, well, yeah, it should be a no-brainer that China has more gold than the United States if you take into account private ownership. More likely, probably India has more gold than the United States when you take into account private ownership, because they are the second largest population in the world. But nonetheless, and of course, understanding too how the government is, especially in China, being a more oppressive government, where they could confiscate it for their own wishes. Gold confiscation in China, well, they did it in the United States to a degree anyway, which they can do it here. They can most certainly do it there. It means the state could own a lot of gold and take over that exchange. But I think that's the thing, is how you basically divvy up the numbers and with ownership. But I think it's fascinating, and this does tell us with this infographic here about the amount of gold produced, 3,200 tons over the past year here, and with China being the top producer here based off the USGS. These are our numbers calculating China's gold holdings, and how much we're producing and how much we're adding to our reserves. Well, it ain't much. fact, we're taking it away. Now, we're far ahead of the second largest holder of gold here by our central banks, and it is something to be said. It is fascinating to see where these numbers lie. And I believe these other nations are catching up to us very, very quickly. And I think that we should be accumulating more gold in our Federal Reserves. But the thing is there's something called hubris that's going on in the United States with the Federal Reserve, as evident by the loose monetary policies that we are doing, because everybody else is doing it as well. But nonetheless, we're holding on mostly to our gold. Whereas in the year 2000, we had more, 8,139, and now we have 8,135 tons. So it'll be very interesting. I wish we could see what these numbers are there. More than likely, it's probably China and Russia. We know they've been adding more. Why did they cut that off? I have no idea. But nonetheless, they are adding more, All these nations here mostly are adding more, save for the United Kingdom, which they sold a lot back in 1999, I believe, under Gordon Brown. And Portugal has dropped off a little bit as well, as the Netherlands has decreased fairly substantially. But most of these other nations, especially the BRICS nations, are adding a lot because they want to compete with the dollar. But there you have it. So I would say the answer to that question, does China have more gold than the U.S.? If you do it per capita, I would say probably yes, if you count private ownership. But I would say no if you take into account their actual reserves, their government reserves. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.